In the spring of 1985, the city managers of Beaumont, Texas, and Toledo, Ohio, woke up to an impossible reality. Their municipal treasuries, meticulously parked in what were supposed to be the safest investments on Earth, had simply vanished overnight. The funds were not lost to a stock market crash or a foreign war, but evaporated inside a financial mirage built on the sun-drenched shores of Fort Lauderdale. This was the collapse of ESM Government Securities, an event that would ultimately erase hundreds of millions of dollars, trigger a massive banking panic, and expose a terrifying void at the heart of state finances. To the outside world, ESM projected an aura of impenetrable stability. Operating from an opulent Florida headquarters, the firm catered exclusively to municipal governments and local savings and loan associations. They dealt in government-backed debt, an asset class considered so exceptionally secure that institutional investors rarely scrutinized the underlying mechanics of the trades. The firm leveraged this inherent trust, weaponizing the very concept of civic financial safety to construct a devastating economic trap that operated undetected for more than 7 years. The engine of this deception was a financial instrument known as a repurchase agreement, or repo. In a standard repurchase agreement, a dealer sells government securities to an investor, usually overnight or for a few days, and promises to buy them back at a slightly higher price. It functions essentially as a short-term collateralized loan. Municipalities loved these agreements because they offered a safe way to earn interest on idle taxpayer cash while keeping the funds highly liquid. But ESM was not operating a standard repo business. Behind closed doors, the firm was hemorrhaging cash through disastrous speculative trading in the bond market. To conceal these catastrophic losses, the executives devised a sophisticated shell game. They created an unregulated affiliate company and began transferring the massive trading deficits off the main broker-dealer balance sheet. When municipalities wired millions of dollars to ESM to purchase securities, the firm often failed to actually segregate or transfer the collateral, instead using the fresh cash to cover older bleeding positions. This shell game required a profound failure of oversight to survive. Institutional investors rely heavily on independent audits to verify the health of the broker-dealers holding their money. For ESM, that stamp of legitimacy came from Alexander Grant & Co., one of the nation's most respected accounting firms. The pristine audit reports provided by Alexander Grant acted as an impenetrable shield, allowing ESM to solicit billions of dollars from conservative civic institutions that would have otherwise fled at the first sign of insolvency. The integrity of those audits rested on the shoulders of one man, Jose Gomez, a managing partner at Alexander Grant. In the late 1970s, Gomez discovered the glaring discrepancies in ESM's books. He saw the hidden losses, the phantom collateral, and the desperate transfers between affiliate accounts. As a sworn gatekeeper of the financial system, his professional duty was clear: blow the whistle, halt the audits, and expose the insolvency. Instead, Gomez made a choice that would forever alter the landscape of American finance. The executives at ESM recognized the auditor's hesitation and moved to exploit his vulnerability. They did not threaten him, they co-opted him. Over several years, they quietly funneled approximately $200,000 into Gomez's personal accounts, framing the bribes as loans to support his lifestyle. This calculated psychological manipulation transformed the independent watchdog into a captive co-conspirator. Once Gomez accepted the first payment, the trap snapped shut. He was no longer just auditing the firm, he was actively managing the cover-up. With the compromised auditor signing off on clean financial health, the trap widened to ensnare deeply vulnerable targets. Local governments across the country, operating on tight budgets and desperate for slightly higher yields, poured taxpayer money into the firm. Savings and loan associations, particularly in the Midwest, heavily leveraged their depositors' savings through ESM's repo desk. These institutions were entirely blind to the fact that their supposedly secure government collateral was either missing, pledged to multiple parties simultaneously, or entirely fictitious. The human toll of this institutional blindness was profound. Behind the abstract ledgers of municipal accounts were the salaries of police officers, the budgets for local schools, and the retirement security of municipal employees. The victims were not wealthy venture capitalists taking calculated risks. They were civic managers charged with protecting the public purse. Their reliance on the word of a prestigious accounting firm and the deceptive comfort of the term government securities left them utterly defenseless against the impending shockwave. Unraveling this intricate web proved exceptionally difficult for federal authorities. The SEC investigation began as a slow burn, sparked by rumors and subtle anomalies in the bond market, rather than a glaring collapse. Investigators faced a labyrinth of intercompany transfers designed specifically to baffle regulators. Because the unregulated affiliate company absorbed the losses, the regulated broker-dealer appeared solvent on paper. The dual entity structure acted as a firewall, keeping the SEC's initial inquiries at bay while the deficit silently ballooned past $300 million. The sheer audacity of the accounting fraud complicated the forensic untangling. Investigators poring over the ledgers found that ESM had essentially recorded the same assets multiple times, creating a hall of mirrors that distorted the firm's true financial reality. Without the cooperation of the internal auditors, the SEC had to reconstruct years of complex, high-velocity trading data from scratch. The delayed discovery meant that by the time the regulators finally pierced the corporate veil, the financial contagion had already spread far beyond Florida. The breaking point arrived with brutal suddenness in March 1985. Unable to sustain the cash requirements of their hidden losses, the executives could no longer meet their obligations. The SEC, having finally gathered enough evidence of the massive shortfall, secured a court order to freeze the firm's assets and shut down operations. The pristine facade shattered instantly, revealing a catastrophic $315 million crater where municipal treasuries and bank reserves were supposed to be safely housed. The collapse triggered an immediate, cascading financial panic that struck the heartland of America. The most exposed institution was Home State Savings Bank in Cincinnati, Ohio, which had aggressively invested heavily with ESM. When news broke that the firm was a massive fraud and the collateral was gone, Home State faced catastrophic, unrecoverable losses. Terrified depositors, realizing their life savings were suddenly in jeopardy, rushed the bank branches in scenes reminiscent of the Great Depression. The panic at Home State Savings rapidly metastasized into a systemic crisis. As depositors lined up around city blocks to withdraw their cash, the contagion of fear spread to other privately insured savings and loans across the state. The crisis revealed a terrifying fragility in the regional banking system. The state-backed insurance fund that was supposed to protect these depositors was completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the losses stemming from the Florida fraud. Faced with the imminent collapse of the entire state banking system, the governor of Ohio took unprecedented emergency action. In a move that shocked the nation, he declared a bank holiday, forcibly closing 71 savings and loan institutions to halt the catastrophic run on deposits for days. Ordinary citizens were entirely locked out of their accounts, unable to access money for groceries, mortgages, or medical bills. The invisible strings of a complex Wall Street scam had pulled tight around the wallets of Middle America. Looking back at the mechanics of the disaster, the core deception relied on exploiting the physical abstraction of modern finance in a repurchase agreement. The collateral is rarely physically delivered to the buyer. It is held in a clearing bank. EESM manipulated this clearing process, instructing their banks to move securities in ways that masked the fact that they did not actually own enough bonds to back their trades. They sold the ghost of a bond, over and over again, harvesting real cash for imaginary collateral. This phantom collateral scheme thrived in a regulatory blind spot. At the time, the government securities market was astonishingly opaque. While the SEC heavily regulated corporate stocks and bonds, the debt issued by the United States Treasury was considered so inherently safe that the dealers trading it were largely left to police themselves. This lack of mandatory federal oversight over repo dealers created a dark pool where fraudulent actors could operate with impunity, leveraging the pristine reputation of the U.S. government to mask their own insolvency. The devastating fallout forced a massive reckoning in Washington. Lawmakers realized that the illusion of safety had become a systemic threat. This led directly to the passage of the Government Securities Act of 1986. For the first time, all brokers and dealers of government debt were required to register with federal regulators, maintain strict capital reserves, and adhere to rigorous record-keeping standards. The legislative response aimed to drag the shadowy repo market into the light, ensuring that collateral was actually segregated and protected. Crucially, the new regulations fundamentally changed how institutional investors handled repurchase agreements. Municipalities and banks were heavily instructed to demand third-party custodial control of their collateral. The era of blindly trusting a broker-dealer to hold the underlying bonds was over. By mandating that an independent bank verify and hold the securities, regulators installed a critical circuit breaker designed to prevent another rogue firm from quietly selling the same asset to a dozen different mayors. As the new laws were drafted, the architects of the disaster faced their own reckoning. The executives who engineered the massive cover-up were handed lengthy federal prison sentences. Jose Gomez, the corrupted gatekeeper, whose silence enabled the entire catastrophe, also went to prison, becoming a cautionary tale in the accounting profession. His actions brought devastating civil litigation and severe reputational damage to Alexander Grant & Co., permanently altering the firm's trajectory and serving as a grim reminder of the catastrophic cost of compromised audits. For the civic victims, the road to recovery was grueling and deeply painful. cities like Beaumont were forced to implement draconian austerity measures, slashing public services, delaying infrastructure projects, and laying off municipal workers to plug the massive holes in their budgets. The financial scars lasted for a generation, a constant bitter reminder of the day their trusted investments vanished into the Florida sun. The betrayal shattered the foundational trust between local governments and the broader financial markets. The enduring psychological lesson of the scandal lies in the power of the halo effect. The term government securities carried such immense authoritative weight that it short-circuited the critical thinking of experienced financial managers. The fraud succeeded not because the math was brilliantly complex, but because the perpetrators wrapped their deception in the American flag. They understood that if you offer an investor a product that sounds undeniably safe, they will rarely look under the hood to verify the engine. The resolution of the case also highlighted the vital, often delayed role of internal whistleblowers and persistent skepticism. The facade did not crack because of a routine audit, but because the sheer weight of the lies eventually became too heavy to balance. The SEC investigation succeeded only after piercing the layers of professional complicity, proving that financial regulators must constantly look past the polished letterhead of prestigious auditing firms to examine the raw underlying data of the trades. Today, while the specific loopholes exploited by ESM have been largely closed, the architectural vulnerabilities they exposed remain highly relevant. Modern financial markets have grown infinitely more complex, with high-frequency trading, synthetic derivatives, and decentralized finance creating new shadow systems. The core threat that an institution might pledge the same collateral multiple times or hide massive off-book losses in unregulated affiliates persists in new digital forms. The speed of contagion has only increased, turning a localized fraud into a global crisis in milliseconds. The legacy of the 1985 collapse stands as a permanent monument to the necessity of relentless financial vigilance. It proved that systemic risk does not always originate from exotic, high-risk assets. It can fester quietly within the most conservative, supposedly secure corners of the market. When the watchdogs are compromised and the collateral is a ghost, the entire foundation of public finance is at risk. The disaster rewrote the rulebook for municipal finance, embedding a deep structural skepticism into how public money is managed. Civic treasurers learned through brutal experience that trust is not a substitute for rigorous, independent verification. The phantom promises still echoed long after the final court cases were settled, serving as a grim reminder that in the world of high finance, safety is never guaranteed by a name alone. The story of this massive deception is a stark reminder that the machinery of fraud is constantly evolving, seeking out the darkest corners of our financial systems. Protecting yourself and your community requires a commitment to understanding the mechanics of these schemes before they strike. News Stories Weekly. Stay one step ahead of the fraud. Subscribe.